Okay. All right. Shabbat shalom.
Shabbat
Shabbat
shalom.
shalom. We are back. We are continuing on with our look at the Torah portion. We're looking at the triennial Torah portion. We are in Deuteronomy chapter 9. We'll be looking at today. I also want to look at in the prophets in Jeremiah and also Ephesians. We're going to be dealing with seeing just the connections that we find between Deuteronomy chapter 9 and also Jeremiah chapter 3 and also Ephesians chapter 2. So there's some things that I think kind of relate to each other that are necessary for us, even now. So I want to begin by looking at if we can just read through Deuteronomy chapter 9, pull out a few things within it, and go from there.
Yeah.
Hallelujah. Says Moshe. Okay, let's go ahead and look over at Deuteronomy chapter 9, if we could read through that. And then we'll come back and deal with a few key points here in the chapter. You want to start reading that?
Hear, O Israel, you are passing over the Jordan today to go into dispose of nations greater and stronger than yourself, cities great and walled up to the heavens, a people great and tall, the descendants of the Akim, whom you know, and of whom you heard it said, who to stand before the descendants of Anak. And you shall know today that Yahweh your Elohim is he who is passing over before you as a consuming fire. He does destroy them and subdue them before you. So you shall dispose them and destroy them quickly, as Yahweh has said to you. Do not think in your heart after Yahweh your Elohim has driven them out before you, saying, because of my righteousness, Yahweh has brought me in to possess this land. But it is because of the wrong of these nations that Yahweh is driving them out from before you. It is not because of your righteousness or the uprightness of your heart that you go in to possess their land, but because of the wrong of these nations that Yahweh your Elohim drive them out from before you, in order to establish the word which Yahweh swore to your fathers, to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob. And you shall know that Yahweh your Elohim is not giving you this good land to possess because of your righteousness, for you are stiff-necked people. Remember, do not forget how you provoked to wrath Yahweh your Elohim in the wilderness, from the day that you came out of the land of Mizraim until you came to this place. You have been rebellious against Yahweh. Even in Horeb, you made Yahweh wroth, so that Yahweh was enraged and with you to destroy you. When I went up into the mountains to receive the tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant which Yahweh made with you, then I stayed on the mountains for 40 days and 40 nights. I did not eat bread, nor did I drink water. Then Yahweh gave me the 2 tablets of stone written with the finger of Elohim, and on them were all the words which Yahweh had spoken to you on the mountain from the midst of the fire in the day of the assembly. And it came to be at the end of 40 days and 40 nights that Yahweh gave me the 2 tablets of stone, the tablets of the covenant. Then Yahweh said to me, arise, go down quickly from here, for your people whom you brought out of Mizraim have acted corruptly. They have quickly turned aside from the way which I commanded them. They have made themselves a molded image, the golden calf. And Yahweh spoke to me, saying, I have seen this people, and look, they are stiff-necked people. Leave me alone, so that I destroy them and blot out their name from under the heavens, and make of you a nation stronger and greater than they. So I turned and came down from the mountain, and the mountain burned with fire, and the 2 tablets of the covenant were in my 2 hands. And I looked and saw that you had sinned against Yahweh your Elohim, and had made for yourselves a molded calf. You had quickly turned aside from the way which Yahweh had commanded you. And I took the 2 tablets and threw them out of my 2 hands and broke them before your eyes. And I fell down before Yahweh, as at the first 40 days and 40 nights. I did not eat bread, and I did not drink water, because of all your sins, which you have committed in doing evil in the eyes of Yahweh to provoke him. For I was afraid of the displeasure and rage with Yahweh was wroth with you to destroy you. But Yahweh listened to me that time once more. And Yahweh was very enraged with Aaron to destroy him. So I prayed for Aaron at that time also. And I took your sin, the calf which you have made, and burnt it with fire and crushed it and ground it very small until it was fine as dust. And I threw his dust into the stream that came down from the mountain. And at Taberah, at the Mount Massa, and Kibroth Hatha, you made Yahweh wroth. And when Yahweh sent you from Kadesh Barnea, saying, go up and possess the land which I have given you, then you rebelled against the mouth of Yahweh your Elohim, and you neither trust him nor listen to his voice. You have been rebellious against Yahweh from the day that I knew you. So I fell down before Yahweh the 40 days and 40 nights, for I fell down because Yahweh had said he would destroy you. And I prayed to Yahweh and said, O Master Yahweh, do not destroy your people and your inheritance, whom you have ransomed in your greatness, whom you have brought out of Mishram with a strong hand. Remember your servants Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Do not look on the stubbornness of this people, or on their wrong, or on their sin, lest the land from which you brought us should say, because Yahweh was not able to bring them out of the land which he promised them, and because he hated them, he has brought them out to kill them in the wilderness. And they are your people and your inheritance, whom you brought out by your great power and by your outstretched arm.
Okay. All right. Very good. Okay, so it's an interesting chapter. I guess it's an interesting few chapters when we look at what Moshe is doing in terms of kind of bringing back to the remembrance of the people a lot of the things that went on in the wilderness, things that they, that they've experienced. Again, because they're right at the edge, they're right about to actually cross over into the land, and they're kind of reflecting on what it is that got them there, at that point. So I wanted to think about, we'll talk about it here some, from a natural perspective, but also we want to think about from a spiritual perspective, because when we look at this, we can, it's multifaceted, right? We're able to look at it from the physical and also from the spiritual. So physically, we're looking at this time, this place when Israel was about to cross over. They were about to cross over into this new land. They were entering into this new life. They had been enslaved for, hundreds of years in Egypt. Coming out of Egypt, they were wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They were nomads. They were wanderers, sojourners, out in this land, and they're about to go and make this transition, this crossover into this new land and this new life. Let me flip over and look at this word here. This is 9. Oh wait, I want to look at another version so we can look at the word. It's interesting that when we look at this word here, thou, hear, O Israel, thou art to pass over. Pass over. It's interesting that the word pass over or to cross over in the Hebrew kind of is like in the English, it's kind of like the over. Looks like this in the avar.
Sounds like over. Yeah, it does.
Avar. The word is to pass over, or by or through, alienate, bring, carry, do away, take away, so on and so forth. To march over, overflow, to pass beyond, to pass through, traverse. Right? It has this idea of what they're doing. Right? They're crossing over. Right? They're crossing over. When we think about this word here, abar, what is a word that comes from this word to cross over that we know of?
I know. Is it unfair for me to say?
Only if O'Day has the answer.
What?
What's another word that do you know a related word that comes from this word to cross over? Abar.
Bar. Hebrew.
In the Hebrew. What?
Hebrew.
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly. Right. So when we think about this idea of crossing over, we're a people, right? That has crossed over. We're people that began from a person who crossed over, right? He went and he left out from where he was into a new life, into a new existence. And we're talking about Avram, right? He went from being with his kinsfolk and he left out. He crossed over from being, with his people, with his kinsmen, out into a life of the unknown, right? To be a follower of the Almighty and to live according to how the Almighty was going to have for him to live for the rest of his life, right? So when we look at this transition point, when Israel's about to cross over, right? Moses is bringing to the people's attention how they got to this place and what brought them to this place in the first place, right? As they get ready to make this transition, right? This move, this crossover, right? Here it's literally over the Jordan, right? They're literally crossing this river, right? But when you think about what's actually going on, their lives are changing into a state of existence that's totally new, right? They're going and entering into this land. Not only they're entering into this land, the first thing you got to do is destroy the inhabitants of the land, right? They got to go against these nations that are, it says, greater and mightier than themselves, into these cities that are great cities and fenced up to the heavens, right? These fortified cities. And they're going to go in there and they're going to fight these people, the same people, by the way, that caused them to be wandering in the wilderness in the first place, because they saw these people and said, these people are too great. We can't fight them. There's nothing that we could do against these people. They're too much for us. They're giants. We can't go in there, right? But now they're about to go in, and those same people, again, those same people that turned them away before, they're about to go in and dispossess these people from this land. But Yahweh is telling Moses, who's telling the people, to put at the forefront of their minds understanding that it is the Almighty and his power and his strength that's actually doing the work, right? It's the Most High who's making this all possible, right? He said he's going to, verse 3, he's going to go in, he's going to go over, he's going to cross over before you as a consuming fire and destroy them all.
Isn't that interesting? Like, if they would have just went over the first time, Yahweh would have went before them anyway.
Right. He was already doing that before. He was already leading them through the way. He was already doing it.
So
if they would have just they would have just been able to walk in faith, if they would only been able to be like Joshua and Caleb and be able to trust in the Almighty and his strength, right? They would never had they would never have been where they are, right? Because it's really just they just really back right where they were again, right? All of the faithless ones died off already, right? So they had nobody to hold them back anymore, right? They was about to go in. All the naysayers,
they got destroyed,
right?
But it's just, he's crossing over before they're crossing over,
Right?
So there's no excuse for them not to cross over.
Right. There's nothing that's holding them back. Again, even though this is not something that's new, it's not something that wasn't the case before. It just teaches us a lesson that when we look and see, we can't look, and especially in this case, the Most High said he was going to take you out of Mitzrayim and bring you into this land that I promised your fathers. Right? That was part of his plan. Right? Part of the Most High's divine plan was to get AD.
Yeah.
Right?
Get lost in the middle.
Right. So you was gonna get over there. That's where you was going. That was the whole point of this thing from the beginning. So that was lost. Well, it wasn't lost. It was hindered. It was there was like a little a pause in the situation only because of faithlessness. But I wanted to look at these verses here, 4 through 6. Pay a little attention to these verses here. Deal with them. It says, speak not thou in thine heart after that Yahweh thy Elohim have cast them out from before thee, saying, for my righteousness Yahweh hath brought me in to possess this land. But for the wickedness of these nations Yahweh doth drive them out from before thee. Not for the righteousness or for the uprightness of thine heart does thou go to possess the land, but for the wickedness of these nations Yahweh have thy Elohim doth drive them out from before thee, and that he may perform the word which Yahweh sware unto thy fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Understand therefore that Yahweh thy Elohim gives thee not this good land to possess it for thy righteousness. He says it's like 3-4 times. For thou art a stiff-necked people. Thou art a stubborn, rebellious people. Right? So he's making it known. It's not because of who you are that you getting over into this land. It don't have nothing to do with, what you're capable of doing. It don't matter that Yahweh, the Most High makes the people weak, right? He goes in and puts them in a place where they're able to be subdued and taken over by the lesser nation who is Israel. So when you do that, when that happens, it can cause the people to feel a certain kind of way as if they was the ones who did it.
You feel like, oh, look at what I did, and now I could go and conquer anyone because I done conquered these people.
But the Most High is saying to these people, he first of all, he don't want them to, feel any way about themselves because he's doing it, but he's specifically saying it's not due to your own righteousness. It's not due to your own abilities to be this or to be that. Right? It doesn't have anything to do with your uprightness, but it has only to do with the plan of the Almighty. Right? It's Yahweh's plan that is being exacted. Right? So this is what we have to understand when we look at what's going on. It's not because of the acts of the people.
It's not even an act of war. It's not even an act of war.
Right. It doesn't have anything to do with the people.
And it's not like a physical thing. Like because they went in and fought the people and they beat the people, that means they're better.
Yeah. Well, he's not dealing with that, even though that could be a thing. That could be a thing because of the men's hearts. That could be a thing. But he's dealing with the this idea of righteousness and uprightness. What's this, Yashar? Yes. Straightness, evenness, moral implications. Right? He's dealing with this idea of making sure that these people, this people Israel, is not looking at their own moral fortitude, their own moral standards, and just letting them know that it has nothing to do with that. In fact, you're wicked.
He puts them in their place.
Right? In fact, you're a stubborn people. Right? You're a stiff-necked people. unable
So it's kind of like
to turn.
This is, and don't even say it's because of the wickedness of the people right there.
Well, it is. It's for the wickedness of the people is what it is.
The wickedness of the people. It's not even really your,
It's because they're so bad. It don't got nothing to do with you being good.
It's not like how we look at Noah. He was righteous amongst his generation.
Yeah. Well, yeah, we could look at Noah the same way. I did look at Noah and think about him as having this relative righteousness in terms of him being right before the Almighty. If he's so right,
yeah,
I don't know how. I don't know how.
How could that happen?
No, I'm saying I don't know how right he could be when we're just looking at him next to, people who's just in gross iniquities.
It's like if you're dealing with someone who's like a genius or whatever, like it's all relative. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, if
I mean, I could be a genius depending on the company that I'm with.
If I'm with a whole
I could be, you know what I mean?
Like, oh,
I could be like Albert Einstein. You know what I mean?
If some people don't know what's going
on. So again, when we look at Israel at this time, Moses is letting these people know, look, you're going over into this land and you're going to dispossess this land, and these people are going to be you're going to take their place. But it's not because of your righteousness that this is happening. It's not because of the uprightness of your heart that this is happening, but because of my divine plan, which includes the wickedness of these people that's in the land. Which, when you think about it again, we're dealing with this land that was promised to the forefathers, right? So when we think about the wickedness of the people, I feel like the wickedness of the people is the thing that's on top. But I feel like the thing that's beneath all of that is the plan of Yahweh, the promise that the Most High made to Abraham, that land over there was going to be his land. Right, and there was going to be righteousness and uprightness associated with it, and it was, at the time taken over by these wicked people. But not only do we see that the Most High is dealing with these people and talking about them, the people and their wickedness. But when we go down further, we see that the Almighty, through Moses talking to the people, is bringing back to their remembrance this whole golden calf situation, right? Which is an example of wickedness. Right, so he's not necessarily looking at the people and saying that they're wicked. He's just bringing to the remembrance the wicked acts that they did.
Right. Remember what y'all was doing.
Which he might as well have just said that they was wicked, right? Because he was literally going to start over. He was literally going to wipe all the people out and just let Moses' seed be the people. So he goes through, again, as we read, he goes through, the whole situation, the whole golden calf situation. And we see again this rebellious, stiff-necked people. Right, and again, we think about stiff neck. My neck is kind of stiff today, man, because I think it's slept weird or the cold setting in.
Mm-hmm.
But you got that stiff neck, you can't turn all the way. Right? You can't turn your head. Like it's kind of like it's painful, right? So you don't want to do it. You don't want to turn. But when we think about what the Most High calls for us to do, he calls for us to turn. He calls for us to turn away from our own thoughts, our own desires, trusting in our own strength. And he wants for us to turn to him. And he wants to be the one who we set our sights on and we put our heart's desires in. Right? So he's looking at this people and referring to this people as a stiff-necked people, a stubborn, rebellious people who are not able to turn unto the Almighty. And again, all this before they go in, making sure that they understand that it doesn't have anything to do with you and what you've done. Because when you look back at what the people done, they ain't done nothing. They only did things that caused them death and separation in the wilderness. Right? If we was going to look at the things that the people did in the wilderness, and that be the thing that caused the people to go in, you know, if the measuring rod was based on what the people did, the people never would have crossed over into the land, right? But it was about the divine promise that the Most High made to the forefathers, and not because of the works of the people, right? In fact, it was in spite of the works of the people. Okay, so when we look at this chapter 9, this is really what we see. We see again this recalling of what went on in the wilderness, but it made me think about again, you know, we talked about a few weeks ago. We talked about the idea of grace in the old covenant, right? Grace in the Torah, right? And we look and we see, you know, this is a prime example, right? Because the reward that the people receive in terms of going into the land, it doesn't have anything to do with the actions of the people. Right? And that's something that is expressed explicitly here in regards to, you know, the starting with, again, with the, you know, you dealing with this greater, stronger nation in this city that should be fortified in such a way that it would be impenetrable to people like you, like Israel, right? But yet and still, you know, with these great people, these Anakims, right? These big people they was looking at and was thinking they was giants. But yet and still, you're gonna go in and dispossess them. But again, not because of what you were able to do, but because of this plan that the Almighty has, right? So that's what we see here when we look at Deuteronomy chapter 9, and we just think about the idea that the Most High has a plan. He has a plan for his people. He makes a way for the carrying out of the plan. And, we see this, time and time again throughout scripture. Now, I wanted to start off by looking at this from a physical perspective in terms of looking at, these things that are brought up when Israel is about to cross over, is about to enter into this new way of life. And the fact that the Most High is making a way for the people outside of the strength and the abilities of the people. And again, we see that here in chapter 9 of Deuteronomy. So I didn't want to spend too much time in chapter 9. I just wanted to kind of look at those things, these key points as we move forward and look into the prophet Jeremiah. So we're going to go over to Jeremiah chapter 3, thinking about, again, keeping in mind the Most High seeking to fulfill his divine plan in spite of the people's ability to fulfill. All right, so let's look over at Jeremiah chapter 3.
Ready?
Yeah, we want to read through. Let's see how long this is. I want to read through it. Just read till you get tired, and then somebody else can pick up. Hold on a second.
Keep going.
Hold on. Okay, there you go.
Elohim said, if a man puts away his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's, does he return to her again? Will not that land be made greatly unclean? But you have committed whoring with many lovers. And would you return to me, declares Yahweh? Lift up your eyes to the bear's height and see, where have you not lain with men? Besides the ways you have set for them like an Arabian in the wilderness, and you made the land unclean with your whoring and evil ways. Therefore, the showers have been well withheld, and there has been no latter rain. You have had a whore's forehead. You refuse to be ashamed. Shall you not from now on cry to me, my father? You are the God of my youth. Does one bear a grudge forever? Does one keep it to the end? See, you have spoken and done the evils that you could. And Yahweh said to me in the days of Yeshua, the sovereign, have you seen what backsliding Israel has done? She has gone up on every high mountain and under every green tree, and they're committed whoring. And after she had done all these things, I said, return to me. But she did not return. And her treacherous sister, Yehuda, saw it. And I saw that for all the cause for which backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister, Yehuda, did not fear, but went and committed whoring too. It came to be through her first frivolous whoring that she defiled the land and committed adultery with stones and wood. And yet for all this, her treacherous sister, Yehuda, has not turned to me with all her heart, but falsely declares Yahweh. And Yahweh said to me, backsliding Israel has shown herself more righteous than treacherous Yehuda. Go and proclaim these words towards the north and say, return, O backsliding Israel, declares Yahweh. I shall not look on you in displeasure, for I am loving, committed, declares Yahweh. And I do not bear a grudge forever. Only acknowledge your crookedness, because you have transgressed against Yahweh your Elohim, and have scattered your ways to strangers under every green tree, and you have not obeyed my voice. declares Yahweh. Return, O backsliding children, declare Yahweh, for I shall rule over you, and shall take you, one from a city and two from a clan, and shall bring you to Zion. And I shall give you shepherds according to my heart, and they shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. And it shall be when you have increased and shall be fruitful in the land of those days, declare Yahweh, that they no longer say, the ark of the covenant of Yahweh, neither would it come to heart, nor would they remember it, nor would they visit it, nor would it be made again. At that time, Jerusalem shall be called the throne of Yahweh, and all the nations shall be gathered to it, to the name of Yahweh, to Jerusalem, and no longer walk after the stubbornness of their evil heart. In those days, the house of Yehudah shall go to the house of Israel, and they shall come together out of the land of the north to the land that I have given as inheritance to your father. But I said, oh, would I put you among the children and give you a pleasant land, a splendid inheritance of the hosts of the nations. And I said, call me my father, and do not turn away from me. But indeed, as a wife betrays her husband, so have you betrayed me, O house of Israel, declares Yahweh. A voice was heard on the bare heights, weeping supplications of the children of Israel, because they have prevented their ways. They have forgotten Yahweh, their Elohim. Return, O backsliding children. I shall make your backsliding cease. See, we have come to you, for you are Yahweh, our Elohim. Truly, delusions come from high hills, the noisy throngs of the mountains. Truly, in Yahweh, our Elohim, is the deliverance of Israel. For shame has devoured the labors of our fathers from our youth, their flocks and their herds, their sons and their daughters. We shall lay down in our shame, while our reproach covers us. For we have sinned against Yahweh, our Elohim. We and our fathers from our youth had to this day, and I have not obeyed the voice of Yahweh, our Elohim.
Okay.
I gotta write that one verse down, man.
Let's go get you some papers. Okay, so all right, so when we look at this, right? When we look at this, when we think about this, first of all, just kind of relating it to Deuteronomy chapter 9, when we see Yahweh dealing with Israel and about to cause them to cross over into the land, and specifically bringing it up the fact that they're getting into the land not because of their own strength and their own power, right? And then now we look over here in Jeremiah chapter 3, and the prophet is declaring these words of Yahweh, and all we see is the wickedness of the people.
Mm-hmm.
And yet and still, Yahweh is not turning his back on Israel, even though the people have turned them back on him. So, again, when I look at that, I see, the connection I see is the fact that Yahweh is not dealing with the way that he feels towards his people is not changed or dependent on the people's strength and abilities. But something interesting we see in verse 1 here, Elohim said, there's a question that's asked. I don't believe the answer is put forth in the chapter here. I want to deal with it a little bit. Elohim said, if a man puts away his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's, does he return to her again? Would not the land be made greatly unclean?
Right.
But you have committed whoring with many lovers. And would you return to me? Declares Yahweh. The people are being described or compared with or described as a wife to Yahweh.
Yeah. It says her, Israel.
If a man puts away his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's wife, does he return to her again? Can the man then go back to this wife who's become this other man? This is a question. That's the question that's asked in Jeremiah 3:1. So I'm saying, what's the answer to that? What's the answer to that question that's posed there?
Mm.
You know the answer?
You said if a man puts away his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's future, he returns to her again. Is not that man?
You help him out, John?
Unclean, but you have committed whoring with many lovers. What was the question again, Tony?
I'm trying to figure out what this is the question here. If a man puts away his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's, does he return to her again?
Ooh, no, that's a deep one. Most likely not. Yeah.
You saying most likely not. John just said definitively no. Just no.
But some do return foolishly.
All right, so what you basing that on what, John?
I'm basing that on, I mean, if he's likening us to a wife, we go back to the Torah, you know, it speaks about, hey, a man, you know, basically adultery. You know, this is talking about, you know, a whoring or doing adulterous acts, and the judgment for those things, one, if you caught, is death. You know, so.
Well, okay, so I think two things are happening here, right? When it asks the question, it says if a man puts away his wife and she goes from him and becomes another man's, we could look at that in terms of that being like the context seems to put it, because it says whoring over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So the context causes us to think about the idea of adultery, where she's married to one man and she's going out and being with another man.
Yeah.
But we could also look at it in terms of the idea of the wife actually becoming another man's, or you know, becoming another man's wife is another thing.
Right.
So the relationship, the second relationship, is a verified relationship. He stops being the wife of the one man and then becomes another man's wife.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
But I think that the results, I think, are still the same in terms of can the first husband return back to that wife that he put away that became another man's? And again, I'm saying no. So again, we look at the context, it seems as if it's dealing with whoredom. But we can look back, as you say, in the Torah and find where it's not necessarily dealing with whoring, but it's dealing with a man putting away his wife, the wife going to be with another man and becoming another man's wife, and then not being able to return back to the first wife. So if we look over at this is straight out of the Torah.
Mm-hmm.
We look over in Deuteronomy 24, 1 through 4. It says, when a man takes a wife and shall marry her, I don't know what else you do with a wife but marry her, right? Take a wife and marries her, then it shall be, if he finds no favor in his eyes, because he has found a matter of uncoveredness in her, and shall write her a certificate of divorce and put it in her hand and send her out of his house. And if she left his house and went to become another man's wife, this is basically what we're seeing over in Jeremiah, right? If out of his house went to become another man's wife, and a later husband, now the second husband shall hate her and write a certificate of divorce and put it in her hand and send her out of his house. And when the later, hold on. Oh, and when a later husband dies, who took her to be his wife, then her former husband who sent her away is not allowed to take her back to be his wife after she has been defiled, for that would be abomination before Yahweh. And do not bring sin into the land which Yahweh your Elohim is giving you as an inheritance. All right, so we see right there, according to the Torah, something that's being alluded to over in Jeremiah 24, Jeremiah chapter 3, which you want to go back to. So what we see going on here, again, Yahweh wants for his people to come back.
Yeah.
He wants for his people to turn. He has a love for Israel. This undying love, right? But there's a problem because of the acts of the people, where the people have put themselves in such a position that it has made it difficult for the reconciliation process to be manifest. Kind of like when we look back at the people coming out of Mizraim, Israel as a whole coming out of Mizraim. The men, the people that were able to be accountable for their own actions because of their faithlessness didn't make it in. Right, so the people as a whole had to be changed and transformed in order to be able to make it into the land itself. So when we look at this thing here that's going on, we see, again, Elohim dealing with Israel, talking about Israel, referring to them as this wife that's been put away, that has went and became some other man's that belong. What is that word there? Let's look at that. Put away his wife and become another man's. Oh, okay. So it does say enough. What's this say? That's Ish. Become another man's. Aher. Another man's. Ish. Let's see if you can see it. What is first? See if I got that. There. That's the word there, right? Isha. That's the wife.
got mad now, too.
You got your what? Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you upgraded your situation.
Yeah.
Yes, necessary. Okay, so again, looking at this, right? Looking at this, there is a situation, I would say, because throughout this chapter, we look and we see that again, Yahweh wants his people, but the people are just like the people have always been, and they need to be changed, right? We see a people that, again, here we have these examples of the people going out whoring, right, with many lovers, right? And again, we're looking at this, we're thinking about this in terms of idolatry. These people who became, hold on, it says down, what verse was that where it talks about the wood and the stone?
Yeah, that's equivalent to what he said. Worship other gods of wood and stone.
I don't remember verse 9. And it came to be, though, through her frivolous whoring, that she defiled the land and committed adultery with stones and wood. Right? They made all of these idols, just like how we just looked at in Deuteronomy chapter 9, the golden calf situation. Now, I've heard people talk about, when you look at Jeremiah 3 verse 8, where it says, and I saw that for all the causes for which backsliding Israel had committed adultery, I had put her away and given her a certificate of divorce. So in reference to Israel, in reference to the northern kingdom, it specifically says there that he had given her a certificate of divorce. Yet her treacherous sister Yehuda, the southern kingdom, did not fear, but went and committed whoring too. But it doesn't say that Yahweh gave Yehuda a certificate of divorce. So people would say, well, he didn't ever divorce the southern kingdom, because it didn't say it, right? It says northern kingdom, it says Israel committed adultery and he gave them a bill of divorce. But it didn't literally say that Yehuda got a bill of divorce, so he didn't ever divorce the southern tribe. What do you think about that? Okay.
And you look at the history, it kind of follows it a little bit to the point where the Assyrians, when they took the northern kingdom and besieged them and took them into captivity, and the longest standing still then was the southern kingdom, up until the point, where Yeshua, he had to come down through the southern kingdom to be, redeemers. And then after he left, that's when that kind of dissolved the southern kingdom. But I mean, that's all. I mean, just looking at the history and the progression through the scriptures, that's all the commentary I say in regards to it. I mean,
so I'm trying to figure out, would you be one to make the argument that he never divorced the southern kingdom, because it didn't talk about him actually giving the southern kingdom a certificate of divorce like it did the northern kingdom?
Yeah, I mean, sticking where we at right now, yeah. I mean, that's basically how it reads.
Yeah. Well, I think, to me, I feel like the reason why I wouldn't say that, the reason why I wouldn't try to make kind of a case for the southern kingdom not being divorced is because, you know, even here, you know, their actions are the same, right? There's no difference between what Israel did and what Yehuda did, right? Even right here, when we see, yet her treacherous sister Yehuda did not fear. In other words, Yehuda saw what happened to the northern kingdom, and that didn't even affect them in any way, and they went and did the same thing. And then it's, and you know, we keep reading, this is regarding to Yehuda here, and it came to be through her frivolous whoring, Yehuda, that she defiled the land and committed adultery with stones and wood.
So it seems like this is pretty much speaking that her divorce is next. You know what I mean? It referenced Israel's
right. I don't know how Yehuda gets separated from the action that happened to Israel, because it did the exact same thing.
Right. And it wouldn't be fair to be like, I'm divorced of them because you doing the same thing and you ain't gonna get the same thing. So,
right.
Yeah.
And so thinking about that, as well as thinking about, you know, where we started off at verse 1 in terms of, you know, looking at that verse 1 in two different ways, and let's you know, we again, the context is dealing with the wife being put away and going and joining herself, becoming another man's. Now that we looked at it back in the Torah in terms of it being an official break and then an official reconnection, but it's the same actions that's going on if that wife goes and kind of joins herself to another man, whether it be through marriage or just through sex. It's still causing a pollution to happen, that when she goes back to that original husband, it defiles the whole situation, and it's an abomination. So again, we could look at it in two different ways in terms of there being an official break and then having this kind of connection with this other man, then coming back, or the non-official break, it just, you know, dealing with whoredom and adultery. So, and again, all of this is just kind of all of this is just really a picture, because it's not literal adultery, it's spiritual adultery, which is idolatry, right? All of this is talking about idolatry, is talking about assigning these other things as your Elohim in place of the Almighty. And just likening it to you know, our, you know, physical relationship, so that we can understand it on another level, right? So again, now thinking about all of this, thinking about how this people that the Most High wants and desires to be his people, how they're not meeting the mark, how they're not doing those things which are pleasant in his sight, yet and still he still wants to be with those people in spite of their own inadequacies. And so again, when we look at this and comparing it back to Deuteronomy, where we see how he's moving the people into the land, despite the fact that they're not able to be a righteous and upright people. In fact, him moving them into the land doesn't have anything to do with their righteousness or their uprightness, right? It has only to do with the Most High fulfilling his plan. So now when we look at this, now when we look at the prophet now speaking with these people who have seen, at this point has seen the northern tribe disappear because of their wickedness, because of the fact they turn away from the Almighty. That that wasn't enough for them to cause them to change. Still, the Most High is, still pleased. Verse 13, only acknowledge your crookedness because you have transgressed against Yahweh your Elohim. If you just acknowledge your crookedness, right? If you would just take ownership of your actions and deal with them accordingly, right? Return, O backsliding children, for I shall rule over you and shall take you from one city and two from a clan and shall bring you to Zion. So when we think about this, we look and see what Yahweh said he's going to do. He's going to do it. These things are going to happen for Israel. But we have to be able to deal with how this is going to be done. Because the Most High is not going to go against his own self. Right? He's not going to go against his own commands. He can't just take the people as they are back to himself. This people who just goes around and just commits these things under every tree, right? Just giving away their treasures to whosoever. There has to be a change. There has to be a transformation that happens with the people. And again, when we look back at Deuteronomy and we see with Israel, there was a type of transformation that happened. Because again, the situation didn't ever change. The situation didn't never change. There was still giants over in the land. There was still a land that was greater, a people that was greater than Israel was still over there. From the time that they didn't want to go over to the time that they was ready to go over. The situation never changed. It was the people that changed, right? It was Israel that changed and was prepared to make that crossover, to make that transition, right? That 40 years happened where they had to be chastened in the wilderness, where they had to be shaped in the wilderness. So when we look over here and see where we see the Most High saying through the prophet, you're this wicked people that goes off and you take on these other gods, yet and still I still want you. He's not saying that I want you to be like you are. He's just saying simply that he wants you. In fact, he's saying the opposite. I want you to return back to me. I want you to stop doing all these things that you're doing. But he's not dealing with, in this chapter at least, how that happens. He's just saying that he wants it to be.
Yeah.
Right? We don't see here from looking in Jeremiah chapter 3 how that thing is realized. We see that it will be realized. We see that he's going to take the people back. But we just don't see how he's supposed to do it. Especially in light of what we just looked at in Deuteronomy 24, where it seems like he's not able to do it.
Well, are we like skipping verse 15?
What verse 15 say? Verse 15. And I shall give you shepherds according to my heart, and they shall feed you with knowledge and understanding.
So I only said that to say it's like maybe not. It's talking about how we're going to get back.
Mm-hmm.
It don't go into great detail, but
Right.
it's giving you that,
Mm-hmm.
For to come, what he's going to do to help facilitate us, bringing us back to him.
And it helps the idea of that he's just not taking the people just how they are.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be something that happens, because before it talks about they're having them wicked hearts. But he's going to give you shepherds according to my heart, and then they shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. And it shall be when you have increased and shall be fruitful in the land in those days, declares Yahweh, that they okay, so then now that's talking neither would it come to heart nor would it be remembered, will they visit it, would it be made again. Okay, so that's a good verse when you think about the idea that something needs to happen in the people in order for this crossover to happen. Something needs to happen. And the something here is to be fed with knowledge and understanding. So let me see what this. That's verse 15. Feed. Ra'ah. That's interesting. That's what that word is. Which shall feed you with knowledge and understanding. This word is Ra'ah, which is interesting because it's kind of like the word that means to see or to experience. To pasture, 10 graze, feed to 10. Ruler, teacher, people as flock, shepherd, feed.
And then that's how Yeshua came. He was the shepherd. Yeah, he was feeding.
I'm gonna get down to the Strongs. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's a problem. Let me just look at this real quick. I can look at it right here. No, it's not that word. Let's see. Hold on 1 second. Oh, there it is. That's the word right there. Oh, it's phonetically the same, but it's not. It's not the same word.
Depending on your context.
I'm thinking about Resh Aleph Hey, and this is Resh Ein Hey. Resh Aleph Hey is to see or to experience. Sounds exactly the same, Ra'ah, but this is Resh Ain Hey. So they're non-related words. Okay. But we see the same concept because it's talking about feeding you with knowledge, with this is not Yada, but it is what is it from 1843, which is Yad. So it is a related word of Yada, which again has the idea of intimate knowledge, relationship, right, and understanding. That's probably Da'at. Oh, sakal, that's a whole other word. To be prudent, circumspect, wisely circumspect, to look upon insight, give attention to. So when we think about this idea of these pastors, these what's this word here? Oh, that's the same word, right? These give you these pastors to pastor you, these feeders to feed you with knowledge and understanding, right? It's the same word. Look, pastors and feed is the same. So he's giving you these ones to cause you to change back to the way that he would have you to be, so that you can be acceptable. But again, when we think about again, back to the, if we think about it from the physical perspective, it still doesn't necessarily get us back to rectifying the problem that exists due to what we saw in Deuteronomy 24, because you can't take away from the defilement that was, with this joining to these, this other husband. So again, this 15 gives us it points us in the direction of the answer, but it doesn't give us, of course, the full answer, right? Because we see that there needs to be this reformation that happens, this transition, this change that happens with the people. But at this point, we don't know exactly what that is. Right. But this is absolutely a step in the right direction in terms of saying that there needs to be a change, right? There needs to be this transformation that happens so that these things can come to pass that the Most High is longing to be, right? Because again, you're dealing with this people who, have totally rebelled against the Almighty. Okay, so when we think about Yeshua now, when we think about Yeshua in light of this, right? When we think about Yeshua in light of this, when we look at the severity of, the people, we look at the severity of the people. It's the same kind of thing when we look at Yeshua and his life and what he did. When we think about how he comes across these literal harlots, right? These literal people who, if they had all of the evidence in order, could literally be killed on the spot for their actions. But the solution that Messiah brings to the situation is a transformative solution, where it's a thing that's literally changing the hearts and the minds of the people, right? Where when he was when he walked the earth, he was able to give you the principle, but until the work that he came to do was actually realized, it was just principle, in terms of when he sits up there and says, well, just go and sin no more.
Right.
Principally, that was something that could be realized. Just go and just don't do that anymore. But when we think about according to the old covenant, it don't correspond, because if you was guilty of the sin, you was guilty under the old covenant. But when we think about the realization of the new covenant that comes into play after the death, burial, and resurrection of Messiah, now we see with Yeshua how this mystery can be revealed. Okay, so what we want to gain from Jeremiah chapter 3 is the fact that we see where, despite the condition of the people, that because of the plan of the Almighty, he still has a desire for those people, yet he wants for that people to be changed and transformed so that they're able to be in right standing with him. But we're not able to see how that is how that's played out in the prophets, right? We just see that he's pointing the people in a direction. He's saying that he's going to bring these people back unto himself, but we don't know how he's going to do it. Okay, so now if we look over in Ephesians, I'm going to look over in Ephesians when we can see lastly something that causes us to think about the greater picture, right? If you look over Ephesians. Right, chapter 2. I don't want this version here.
You want me to read it?
Yeah, just read. I'll stop you when I want to stop.
All right, sorry. 22:1.
Yeah.
And you were dead in trespasses and sin. Excuse me. As well as, and you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the ruler of the authority of the air, of the spirit that is now working in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we all once lived in the lust of our flesh, doing the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were made nature, children of wrath, as also the rest.
Yeah. So when we think about this thing that Paul's dealing with here, where he's basically dealing with the condition of man. He's dealing with the condition of the people that, something it's just a constant. It's just, this is that. This is where we are. We live in this world and we are succumb to these authorities of the air, right?
Mhm.
And not only that, but we also succumb to the lusts of our flesh and doing the desires of our flesh and our mind. So when we look back at those wicked people, those people back in uh, Deuteronomy chapter 9, and the contemporaries of that Jeremiah was talking to in Jeremiah chapter 3, the Most High knows the condition of man's heart. And so when we look, in the prophets and we see where the Almighty deals with this idea of this new covenant that's going to happen, the thing that brings this new covenant into effect is the transformation of man's wicked hearts to be able to combat this problem that is the flesh, and its desires.
Right.
When we look back and when we look at, it's interesting when we look at Deuteronomy chapter 9, and the people heard the commandments being given. Moses was up in the mountain receiving the written commandments that they just got finished hearing about. And while he was gone too long, and they built a golden calf to worship and then called it Yahweh
Right.
after they just got finished making it. Not for any other reason but because of the weakness of the flesh, the weakness of our stony hearts. Right. So when we look in Jeremiah, when we push forward and look at Jeremiah, where Yahweh's talking to this people, in spite of the fact that these people are sitting up or committing all these whoredoms, the Almighty understands the weakness of man's hearts. Right? He understands that you got this stony heart, and you always gonna do this lest you change, lest you're changed from the inside out. So by the time we get to Yeshua, we understand that this is what Messiah came to actually do, was to actually change us from the inside out and to deal with this problem that we've always had, which was this flesh and carnality and our inability to be able to subdue the desires of the flesh and of the mind.
Right.
And so when we look over in Ephesians, this is what Paul is sitting up here talking about. So let's keep on reading here in verse 4, chapter 2, verse 4.
You got that, John?
But Elohim, who is rich in compassion because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we are dead in trespasses, made us alive together with Messiah. By favor you have been saved, and raised us up together, and made us sit together in the heavenlies in Messiah. What's that?
Yeshua.
That's Yeshua. Okay. Yeshua, in order to show the coming ages the exceeding riches of his favor and the kindness toward us in Messiah Yeshua.
So when we look at this now, Yeshua now has done something for us, right? He's done something for us. Okay, now I was talking about this thing again that is not a New Testament quote unquote attribute or thing that happens, right? Where he just started to have great love and compassion towards his people. right? This is a this is the same Elohim, right? He had when we look at Jeremiah chapter 3, that's some great compassion right there to look at this people who has done nothing but commit whoredoms against you and say, I still love you.
No wonder.
And I still want to make a way.
No wonder he's a jealous Elohim.
He is a jealous Elohim.
Indeed.
But he makes a way. He has made a way for his people to be able to return unto himself, which is Messiah. Right? Messiah is the way. Right? So while we were yet in sin, right, he sent his son Messiah. Right? He shows us, it says here, who is rich in compassion, rich in loving kindness, because of his great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in trespasses. He made us alive together with Messiah. So we have to think about this idea of this death thing. We have to enter this into the equation and think about this idea of this whole death thing, right? Because here it's talking about even when we were dead in trespasses, or because of our sins, we're dead, separated from the Almighty, right? Because of our sins, right? We're as dead, we're cut off to Him, right? But we're made alive together with Messiah. But by what though?
Yeah, by what?
By death. By death. Here, let me find the verse. Old-fashioned style. My Bible, turning pages. Let's see. Scepter. Okay, found it. Whoa. Chapter 6. Okay, so what then shall we say? Shall we continue in sin to let favor increase? Let it not be. How shall we who died to sin, like we talked about just in this other verse here, we're dead in our trespasses. How shall we who died to sin shall live in it? Shall live in it? Or do we not know that as many as us were immersed into Messiah, were immersed into his death, we were therefore buried with him through immersion into death, that as Messiah was raised from the dead by the esteem of the Father, so also we shall walk in newness of life. Right? So there's a connection between the Messiah's death, this type of death that we participate in, and this newness of life that we also participate in, right? So we see this idea of us dying, right? Death unto life, right? This is necessary for something in us to die so that we can move forward, right? It becomes necessary for something to die in us so that we can move forward. Let me go back. So when we look over here, we read verse 6, and raised us up together and made us to sit together in the heavenlies in Messiah, Yeshua. So it's interesting when we think about this here, talking about us sitting together in the heavenlies. He raised us up together and made us sit together in the heavenlies in Messiah Yeshua.
Mhm.
But this is not, he's not saying this kind of in the future tense, though. He's saying it kind of in the past tense, like it's something that has already taken place. When we think about, first of all, Yeshua, who is the first fruits of them that were raised from the dead, right? When we think about, again, the first fruits, you're receiving that thing that is kind of this beginning of something more that's to come, right? It's proof that the seed has been planted and it began to grow. It didn't get to its full maturity yet, but you can see that is going, it's just going to keep on growing. So Messiah being that first fruits of those that have died and raised from the dead, when we accept Messiah, and then we receive that Ruach HaKodesh on the inside of us, that's that earnest of that spirit, that thing that has been placed inside of us is going to mature and grow into the thing that he has caused for it to be. Right? So we are able to now, while we still have this physical body, to kind of enjoy a relationship with the Almighty, and he deals with us while we're still in these physical bodies, as if our physical bodies have already died and we've already received our spiritual bodies. In other words, he's dealing with us now in our physical bodies as if our physical body has physically died and we have already been renewed into our new self. Like he's dealing with us how we're going to be now before we got to that point. But we're still dealing with this idea of this death thing, right? And Paul talks about this idea of our carnal man being killed, right? So this act that we do in terms of walking out the righteousness of Messiah is dealing with this idea of us being dead, that old man being dead, and this new man being alive. So when we think about the idea that Messiah died and was raised from the dead, we receive his spirit, we receive that Ruach HaKodesh, and we're able to walk in this newness of life. He raised us up together and made us to sit in heavenly places where, we're right now, we're sitting here at 308 Anthony Street, right? Yeah. But we also are sitting together with him in heavenly places now, right? In order to show in the coming ages the exceeding riches of his favor and kindness towards us in Messiah. So we are receiving the benefits now of a thing that hasn't necessarily happened yet in its fullness. Right. But the idea is, what we're thinking about is this idea of this death of our old man being dead. Which, again, now when we think about this, looking at back where we think about this whole idea of Yahweh joining himself to this, to his people that had went astray, it helps us to understand how he's able to do it when we have this idea of this death thing that separates us. Because he can't just go and take the woman back just how she is. He's not able to do it. based on his own stipulations that he created, right? It causes defilement. Lest there is a renewal thing that happens, he's not able to take that woman back. But now when we look at what happens, we see that Messiah dies so that we will too die and all of us be renewed and start again, right? When we think about what it says over in Romans, we're going to come back to Ephesians. Think about what it says over in Romans chapter 7. Let me, can't see it over here. Romans chapter 7.
Oh man, that pencil just keeps flinging out, man. Just threw across the table, fell on the floor. I keep trying to pick it up.
All right, Romans chapter 7, verse 1 says, or do you not know, brothers? For I speak to those knowing the Torah. This is interesting. For I speak to those knowing the Torah, that the Torah rules over a man as long as he lives. For the married woman has been bound by Torah to the living husband. But if the husband dies, she is released from the Torah concerning her husband. So then, while her husband lives, she shall be called an adulteress if she becomes another man's. But if her husband dies, she is free from that part of the Torah, so that she is not an adulteress, having become another man's. Now, when we think about, first of all, when we think about this, idea of death being the thing that separates you from your this vow of marriage, what Torah command is he referring to here? Because I speak to those knowing the Torah, right? That's what he starts off saying. I speak to those knowing the Torah. And then he starts talking about this idea of death being this thing that's releasing you from this bond of marriage. Well, while you look, I'm just going to say I don't know where it is. Not to say that it's not there. No, I don't know where it is. Maybe somebody could find it, but I don't know where it's at. But what I do know is that, when we think about, again, what we were dealing with in terms of this idea of what Messiah has come to do, and the way that he does it is through death, right? He does it through death, starting with his own death for us, and then again finishing it off with our death, right? When we think about how we are the finalizing of our connection to Messiah is through the glorification of our bodies, right? When we no longer have this fight that we have with our carnal flesh, right? So we grow in his likeness from a spiritual perspective more and more as we walk in obedience to Messiah, all the way up until that time when we are changed and transformed completely in death, right? So this idea of death being this thing that's separating us and transferring us over into this other area, is something that we are able to see in with what Messiah has done for us. Right? He died, so that we can be returned back to him. Right? So there can be that separation. There could be that separation, that thing that happens between the husband and his bride, right? He dies and then makes it possible for us to die and then live again so that we can regain that status that he wanted for us to be able to be in from the very beginning. He wanted to take his people back, but he's not able to do it from a physical perspective because of the transgressions of the people, because of the fact that the people became, went into all of this idolatry and the spiritual idolatry. He was not able to take the people back as they were. So he had to make a way so that he could have his people Israel return back to him, which includes death. So when we think about this, when we think about the new covenant and the thing that it provides for us, it provides that way in which his people can be changed and restored to a new position, right? And transformed from this people who continually falls into iniquity because of that spiritual separation that happens. But again, we look at what it is that Yeshua did for us. He provides a way to connect the separation that was caused because of the iniquity of the people. Okay, let's go back to Ephesians. Did you want to say something before, John? I forgot you were saying something.
No, that's cool. So we kind of progressed through. Because I think the initial, what was the question? How can we get back? Or was it in the when the you were reading in Romans? What is that? Verse 2. I was just looking for the Torah.
Oh, you were trying to find what he was talking about.
Yeah.
Did you find it?
No, I mean, not. I mean, all the references are in the New Testament that the Corinthians and everything else. Only other thing I found was the 7:39 in Corinthians first. The wife is bound by the law as long as her husband liveth, but if the husband be dead, she is at liberty to be married to whom she will. Only in so
yeah, there's no Torah command. There's no Torah command that's referring back to.
No. I was thinking maybe in Genesis, with Adam and Eve, when he kind of brought them aside, kind of skimmed over that, but no, I don't think that's pertaining necessarily.
Right. But we do look and we're able to see something. We're able to see that something has to happen, and it can't just be just like it is. Because just in a straight natural sense, he can't just take her back. He can't just take that one back that had went and became an adulteress. He can't just take her back. Something has to happen. Okay, so let's go. Okay, so I wanted to drop down to verse 11 in Ephesians. Therefore, remember that you, and he's speaking now to these Gentiles, these people of the nations, right? Therefore, remember that you once nations in the flesh, Gentiles, it says in the King James, who are called the uncircumcision by what is called the circumcision made in flesh by hands. That at that time you were without Messiah, excluded from the citizenship of Israel, and strangers from the covenants of promise, having no expectation and without Elohim in the world. But now in Messiah, you who once were afar off have been brought near by the blood of Messiah, for he is our peace, who has made both one, and having broken down the partition of the barrier, having abolished in his flesh the enmity, the Torah of the commandments and dogma, so as to create in himself one renewed man from the two being the circumcision and the uncircumcision, right? Those that's the circumcision of the flesh and those that are uncircumcision of the flesh, thus making peace, and to completely restore the favor both of them unto Elohim in one body through the stake, having destroyed the enmity by it. And having come, he brought as good news peace to you who were afar off, and peace to those near. He brought peace to the Gentiles and Israel, the Jew and the Gentile, the one that was afar off and the one that was near. He was able to bring peace because through him we both have access to the Father by one Spirit. So then you are no longer strangers and foreigners, but fellow citizens of the set apart ones and members of the household of Elohim, having been built upon the foundation of the emissaries and the prophets, Yeshua Messiah himself being chief cornerstone, in whom all the building being joined together grows in a set apart dwelling place in Yahweh, in whom you also are being built together into a dwelling of Elohim in the spirit. So we see this thing that's going on. He goes off into this thing that's made available to those that are on the outside, as well as those who are on the inside in terms of the people is concerned, in terms of Israel or the flesh and people that are not Israel. But the idea that I wanted to deal with is this idea of this one new man that is created because of Messiah's blood being shed, and us through faith in Messiah, bringing us to this place of reconciliation with the Father. This thing is good for those that were on the outside, in terms of those who never, the Gentiles who didn't have the promises, they didn't have the covenants, they didn't have the promises. But it's also good for those who did, because they both of us need Messiah. Both of us need Messiah, and both of us need to be reconciled back to the Almighty. And again, we cannot return back to Messiah as we are. He's not able to take us back as we are, right? As just this former harlot. He can't just take the former harlot back and just say, all right, well, just turn from your harlotry. Right? There has to be this transformation thing that happens. There has to be this thing that makes us be able to realize this idea of sitting in heavenly places, right? Which can't be less we we have that Ruach HaKodesh on the inside of us, right? Unless we actually become renewed, right? So when we look back, we think about, again, all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 9, when we think about the idea of Yahweh bringing his people into the land, not by the people's strength, but by his strength, bringing them into the land. Not because of the things that they was able to do, but the things that the Most High decreed, and them just doing what Yahweh said do. You just go over there and you fight them people, and I'm gonna fight the battle actually for you. And then when we look over in Jeremiah chapter 3, when we think about the idea of the Most High dealing with this people who he wants to rejoin back to himself, who he's going to need to have to send someone to those people so that they can be renewed and restored, and have the knowledge and understanding of Yahweh restored back to the people, so that he's able to bring to fruition this idea of these people returning back to himself. And then, of course, we see in other places this idea of this new covenant where he, again, is putting the laws in the hearts of the people, changing the hearts of the people, causing them to be able to walk in his will and his ways. And then all the way up to Ephesians, where we see where, you know, he's here, he's specifically talking to these people who were Gentiles, but who were still able to be joined to the Almighty. Because again, we go all the way back, we dealing with the redemption of mankind. It happens through the physical people, yes, of Israel, but we still dealing with the necessity of mankind as a whole to be restored. So we look and we see kind of the, you know, how this, you know, part of how this can be unfolded with those on the outside being joined to Israel, and them both having access to the Father by the Ruach HaKodesh. So again, we see the need for this transformation, this need for this crossover thing to happen, right? This conversion thing has to happen, whether it be somebody who is a Gentile or whether it's somebody who is physically Israel. There needs to be a change that happens, right? We see there's a stipulation that Yahweh created that death is necessary, because he can't just take that harlot back. Can't just take the harlot back. And if we're talking about, you know, the nations, we're talking about a Gentile, you know, they're already in that kind of idolater status just from the beginning, right? They're already out on the outside. So how are they gonna come in too? Right? Where Yeshua provides this way to take these people who these unqualified people and qualifies us. Right? Whether we talking about physical Israel or those who are on the outside, Gentiles. Okay, so anybody have any thoughts or questions or comments on any of that stuff? Okay, so that being said, I think that that's enough for today to deal with. I just wanted to just show, different aspects of the, how Messiah, how how Yahweh, how the Most High works, and he stays consistent throughout his love for his people, and he has a desire for um, his people. But this whole idea of of grace is, it's not a new thing, right? He been dealing with this insufficient people, and he been making the way for a people to be able to cross over outside of our our physical abilities. He been doing that from day one, right? And so we see that over and over again throughout the scripture. Okay, so that being said, if nobody has any more thoughts, comments, go ahead and end this for now, and come back on next week, y'all willing, for some more.
Sorry I wasn't there. I wasn't feeling too good today.